At the somber funeral, the raven suddenly dove from the tree, clawing and pecking furiously at the girl's lifeless face in the coffin. Chaos erupted as mourners screamed and tried to drive the bird away. But what happened next froze everyone in sheer, breathless disbelief. "Maya, you've got dirt on your knees again," her mother called out from the kitchen window, voice tinged with mock exasperation. Maya, oblivious, crouched by a cluster of daisies in the garden, her tiny fingers brushing aside the petals to inspect a ladybug making its way up a stem. "It's okay, Mama. Dirt's not bad. Bugs like it, and I like bugs," she shouted back, her laugh as bright as the midday sun that dappled the garden's green. The garden stretched wide around their home, a little haven tucked into the sleepy English countryside. The air smelled faintly of fresh earth and blooming roses, carried on a soft breeze that rustled the trees. It was Maya's favorite place, alive with the hum of bees and the gentle rustle of leaves. A place where she felt free to explore and imagine. Her mother wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, shaking her head with a smile. Maya was always like this, wild, curious, and unafraid of a few scrapes. She watched as her daughter darted to the old oak tree where a makeshift swing hung from a sturdy branch. Maya climbed onto it, her laughter ringing out as she pumped her legs, soaring higher with each push. Maya's father wasn't home yet, but she'd been asking about him all week. He was a sailor, often gone for months at a time, but whenever he returned, he brought with him stories of far-off lands and peculiar treasures. A conch shell from a Caribbean beach sat on the mantel, and a tiny hand-carved camel from some distant market rested beside Maya's bed. Each gift carried the scent of adventure and the promise of discovery. "Mama, when's Papa coming back?" Maya called out, slowing the swing just enough to look over her shoulder. "Soon, sweetheart. He'll be here before you know it," her mother reassured her, though she glanced at the horizon, hoping to spot his familiar figure. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold and pink, Maya sat by the garden gate, waiting. The anticipation bubbled up in her, making it impossible to sit still. She fiddled with a blade of grass, her mind running through the possibilities of what her father might bring this time. Would it be another strange, wonderful object? Maybe a music box from a faraway market, or a coin from a land she'd only ever heard about in his stories. And then she saw him, a tall, sturdy figure walking up the lane, his pace steady but unhurried. "Papa!" she shrieked, leaping up and sprinting toward him. She flung herself into his arms with such force that he staggered a step back, laughing as he caught her. "You've gotten stronger, Maya," he said, his voice warm and full of love. He knelt to her level, his weathered hands holding her small, eager ones. "Now, I know you're wondering about your present." Her eyes lit up, scanning him for the familiar shape of a wrapped package. But there wasn't one. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out something small and alive, a tiny black bird, its feathers sleek and shiny. Its eyes glimmered like beads, curious and watchful. "A baby raven," he said softly, placing it gently in Maya's hands. "It needs someone to look after it, someone kind and patient." "Think you can do that?" Maya gasped, her hands trembling as she held the fragile creature. "Papa, it's perfect. I'll take care of it, I promise." She cradled the bird close, her heart swelling with responsibility and excitement. That night, she hardly slept. By the light of a lantern, she fashioned a little nest out of scraps of fabric and twigs, placing it on the windowsill. The raven perched there, its small body warm and soft against her fingers as she stroked its feathers. "I'll call you midnight," she whispered, grinning at her own cleverness. The raven blinked, tilting its head as if to agree. The days that followed were full of joy and discovery. Maya learned to mix tiny bowls of food for Midnight, carefully feeding him morsels while he chirped in gratitude. She marveled at how quickly he grew, his wings gaining strength and confidence. By the third week, Midnight was ready to test his wings. Maya watched with bated breath as he leaped from the windowsill and soared into the garden, circling high before returning to her outstretched arm. "You're amazing, Midnight," she said softly, holding him close. She could feel the steady thrum of his heartbeat, a quiet reassurance that they were connected in a way she'd never experienced before. Midnight had become more than a pet. He was her companion, her friend, her own little piece of magic. The bond between them deepened with each passing day, as Maya poured her heart into caring for the raven. Her parents noticed the change in her, a newfound focus, a quiet determination. "That bird's done her good," her father said one evening, watching Maya in the garden as she practiced calling Midnight with gentle whistles. "Yes," her mother agreed, smiling. "It's taught her something precious, how to care for others, even the smallest of lives." Maya, blissfully unaware of the adults' conversation, was too busy chasing Midnight's shadow as he danced through the twilight sky. The summer day was bright and warm, with golden sunlight pouring over the garden like liquid honey. Maya had spent the morning chasing Midnight's playful loops through the yard, her laughter ringing out as he darted and dove. By midday, the heat had settled, turning the air thick and still. She wandered to her favorite spot beneath the old oak tree, its branches spreading wide, casting dappled shadows that danced gently with the breeze. Maya lay back on the soft grass, letting the cool shade wrap around her. The leaves above swayed lazily, the sun slipping through in shimmering fragments. She shut her eyes, her mind drifting as the rhythmic chirping of crickets filled the air. Midnight perched on a low branch nearby, watching her with quiet attentiveness, his glossy black feathers gleaming like polished onyx. Beside her, Maya had a small tin of candies, brightly colored sweets she'd been savoring one by one. She smiled to herself, tossing a piece of candy into the air and catching it in her mouth. It became a game. Throw, catch, chew, and repeat. Midnight cocked his head, seemingly intrigued, his small feet shifting on the branch. But the game didn't last long. On her next toss, the candy landed wrong, slipping straight into her throat. Maya froze, her hand instinctively flying to her neck. She tried to cough, but no sound came. Panic set in as her airway felt tight, her lungs grasping desperately for air that wouldn't come. Her body jerked as she tried to stand, but her legs gave out and she fell back onto the ground. Midnight's sharp cry pierced the stillness, a sound so loud and frantic that it cut through the quiet of the afternoon. The raven launched himself into the air, circling above her before landing beside her trembling form, hopping and flapping his wings as though trying to rouse her. Inside the house, Maya's parents had been enjoying a rare, peaceful afternoon. Her mother was folding laundry by the open window, while her father read an old, leather-bound book at the kitchen table. Midnight's urgent cawing broke through their calm, making them both pause. "That doesn't sound right," her father said, his voice tightening with concern. Her mother frowned, setting down the laundry. "It's coming from the garden." They hurried outside, following the frantic cries. What they saw stopped them cold. Maya, crumpled under the oak tree, her small body motionless, her face pale. Midnight flapped his wings wildly, letting out sharp, desperate calls as if summoning them to act. "Maya!" her father shouted, running to her side. He dropped to his knees, scooping her into his arms. Her skin was cold, her limbs limp. There were no outward injuries, no sign of what had happened, only the lifeless stillness of her small frame. "What's wrong with her?" What happened?" her mother cried, her voice trembling as she crouched beside them, hands hovering helplessly over her daughter. "I don't know," her father choked out, his face pale as he held Maya close. "She's not breathing. Oh God, she's not breathing." "Get her to the car, now!" her mother screamed, already running toward the driveway. Her father didn't hesitate. He carried Maya to the car, his steps heavy and unsteady, fear coursing through him. Midnight took to the air again, his cries echoing above them as the car roared to life and sped down the road toward the hospital. The drive was frantic and silent, except for Maya's mother's whispered pleas. "Please, baby, wake up, please." Her father's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his face set in grim determination. Midnight followed close behind, a dark blur against the summer sky, his cause growing more frantic as the car disappeared down the winding road. At the hospital, chaos erupted. Nurses rushed Maya onto a stretcher, wheeling her through double doors that slammed shut behind them. Her parents were left in the hallway, helpless and distraught, clinging to each other as the minutes stretched unbearably long. The doctors worked quickly, but there were no answers. X-rays and tests revealed nothing, no broken bones, no visible blockages, no explanation for why a vibrant 6-year-old had suddenly stopped breathing. The machines beeped steadily until they didn't. The moment the sound stopped, the room fell silent, the weight of failure sinking in. The doctor emerged, his face grim. "I'm so sorry," he said softly. "We did everything we could." Her mother let out a wail, collapsing into her husband's arms. No, this can't be happening," she sobbed, her body trembling as he held her tightly. Maya's father stared blankly at the wall, his mind unable to process the words he'd just heard. His little girl, his Maya, was gone. Back at home, grief settled over the house like a suffocating fog. The garden, once filled with Maya's laughter, was eerily silent. Midnight had followed them to the hospital, his sharp cries filling the parking lot as he perched on the window ledge outside Maya's room. He tapped the glass repeatedly, his small beak striking with an urgency no one understood. Her mother glanced at him through the haze of her tears and whispered, "What are you trying to tell us?" The day of Maya's funeral carried an air so thick with sorrow it felt suffocating. The grey sky loomed heavy over the cemetery, and a bone-chilling breeze rustled through the crowd, as though the world itself mourned. Friends, family, and neighbors gathered in hushed clusters around the small white coffin resting on a pedestal surrounded by flowers. Maya's parents sat closest, their faces pale and gaunt. Her mother clung to her husband's arm, her sobs muffled in his shoulder, while he sat rigid, staring blankly at the coffin as if any moment his daughter might sit up and call for them. Inside the coffin, Maya looked peaceful, too peaceful. Her golden hair had been carefully combed, her hands folded over her chest, and her simple white dress made her look like a sleeping angel. But the stillness of her form, so unnatural for a girl so full of life, made many avert their eyes after a brief glance. Each mourner approached in turn, some whispering prayers, others merely shaking their heads in silent grief. But the stillness was soon shattered. Midnight had been perched on a skeletal oak tree near the grave, his black feathers stark against the pale, clouded sky. He had watched everything, unblinking, with an intensity that had unsettled more than a few mourners. The villagers whispered among themselves about the bird. Though Maya's parents had spoken fondly of him before, the raven's presence now in the shadow of death felt ominous. "Ravens don't belong at funerals," an older woman muttered under her breath, clutching her rosary. "They bring nothing but bad luck." "It's an ill omen," another man agreed. "It's watching the soul, ready to carry it off." The murmurs grew louder when Midnight suddenly spread his wings and swooped down from his perch. He flew low over the crowd, brushing close enough to ruffle hair and scatter petals from bouquets. Gasps and startled cries rippled through the mourners as the bird landed directly on the edge of Maya's coffin. His sharp claws scraped against the polished wood, sending a grating noise into the silence. "Get it off!" someone hissed. "It's disrespectful!" Maya's mother clutched her husband's arm tighter, her tear-streaked face frozen in disbelief. "Why is he doing that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Midnight let out a piercing caw, so loud and jarring that it made several mourners flinch. He hopped along the rim of the coffin, his head jerking this way and that as though searching for something. Then, without warning, he leapt into the coffin. Pandemonium broke loose. Shrieks and cries erupted as Midnight landed on Maya's still chest, his wings flapping furiously. "That bird's possessed!" a man shouted, backing away as though the raven might attack. Women pulled their children close, whispering hurried prayers and clutching charms to ward off evil. Maya's father rose to his feet, his face pale with anger and fear. "Get off her!" he bellowed, stepping toward the coffin. But Midnight didn't budge. Instead, he let out another ear-splitting cry and began pecking at Maya's mouth. Her mother screamed, jumping up and grabbing her husband's arm as if to hold him back. "What's wrong with him? He's gone mad!" The raven's frenzied actions drew gasps and more cries from the crowd. Midnight jabbed his sharp beak at Maya's lips, each strike punctuated by an awful sound that seemed to echo across the cemetery. Someone shouted, "It's trying to defile her! Get rid of it!" Maya's father lunged forward, waving his arms to shoo the bird away. But Midnight only flapped his wings defiantly and struck harder, more urgently. His caws were wild, desperate, as if he were trying to say something that no one could understand. Two men moved toward the coffin, but as they reached out to grab the raven, Midnight suddenly flew up, his wings brushing their faces and forcing them back. He circled overhead, screeching, before diving down again, landing on the coffin and resuming his relentless pecking. The sound of his beak against Maya's small frame was unbearable, and her father froze, torn between fury and dread. "It's not an attack," someone whispered shakily. It's doing something." Then, with a sharp jerk, Midnight plunged his beak into her mouth one last time, withdrawing quickly as if he'd grasped something. A small, hard object rolled down onto her chest, glinting in the muted light. A brightly colored piece of candy, sticky and glistening with moisture. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered a prayer under their breath, while another simply whispered, "Dear God." The raven hopped back, his wings spread wide, letting out a triumphant caw before flying to a low-hanging branch of the oak tree. His beady eyes never left the coffin. For a moment the cemetery was utterly silent, the crowd frozen in a tableau of shock and disbelief. Then Maya's body jerked. Her tiny chest rose with a ragged, wheezing breath. Her lips parted as she coughed violently, her small frame shuddering. The silence broke into chaos. "She's alive!" someone yelled, their voice cracking. Maya's mother let out a choked sob and rushed forward, her hands trembling as she cradled Maya's face. "Maya! Baby! Oh my God, baby, it's me, it's Mama!" Tears streamed down her cheeks as she stroked Maya's hair, unable to believe her daughter was breathing again. Maya's father dropped to his knees beside the coffin, his large hands covering hers. "Maya, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Can you hear me? It's okay, you're safe now." Maya blinked, her eyes unfocused and glassy. She coughed again, her body weak but alive. "Mama?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Papa?" "Yes, baby, we're here," her mother sobbed, pulling Maya into her arms. She buried her face in her daughter's hair, clutching her as if letting go might mean losing her again. The crowd, still gathered in stunned silence, began murmuring. "It's a miracle," someone said. Midnight, unbothered by the attention, flapped his wings once, his sharp caw silencing the chatter. Back at the small village hospital, the tension in the examination room grew heavy as the doctor finished explaining the oversight. Maya sat quietly on the examination table, her tiny legs swinging over the edge as her parents stood nearby, their expressions shifting from relief to something darker. Her father's hand clenched into a fist as the doctor's words hung in the air. Without the proper equipment or a more thorough examination of her throat, it's understandable how the blockage went unnoticed. It's an unfortunate mistake, but it happens. "Unfortunate," Maya's father repeated, his voice low and trembling. He took a step forward, his broad shoulders towering over the doctor. "You're telling me it's just unfortunate that we almost buried my little girl alive. That's all you've got to say?" The doctor raised his hands slightly, palms out in a gesture of placation. "Mr. Carter, I understand how upsetting this is, but do you?" Maya's father interrupted, his voice rising. His face was flushed, and his jaw tightened with suppressed fury. "Do you understand what it feels like to think your child is gone? To hold her hand and believe she's not coming back because you didn't do your damn job?" "Papa!" Maya's small voice broke through, but he didn't hear her. His focus was locked on the doctor, whose calm demeanor was only adding fuel to the fire. The doctor sighed, his voice steady but firm. "I am deeply sorry, Mr. Carter, but this is a small facility. We don't have the resources to run the kind of diagnostics that might have caught—" "Don't you dare blame your lack of equipment for this," Maya's father roared, his voice echoing in the small room. He took another step forward, his fist raised slightly. "You had one job, to make sure my daughter was okay. And instead, you almost let me put her in the ground. Do you know what that feels like?" "Daniel, stop!" Maya's mother cried, rushing to place herself between him and the doctor. Her voice shook with urgency as she grabbed his arm. "This isn't helping. Please, for Maya's sake." But Daniel didn't move. His breathing was heavy, and his eyes burned with unshed tears. "I trusted you," he hissed, his voice cracking. "You people are supposed to save lives, not make us think we've lost them." The doctor stepped back slightly, his calm demeanor faltering under the intensity of Daniel's anger. "I understand you're upset," he said carefully, "but I assure you we did everything we could with the resources we have. This was not negligence." "Not negligence?" Daniel's voice dripped with incredulity, and his arm jerked as though he might strike the doctor. "Papa, stop!" Maya's voice rang out louder this time, breaking through the tension like a bell. She slid off the table and ran to her father, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "Please don't be mad anymore." Daniel froze, his fist slowly unclenching as he looked down at his daughter. Her wide blue eyes, still tired but filled with concern, met his, and his anger began to dissipate. He let out a shuddering breath, his hand dropping to his side as he crouched down to her level. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't mean to scare you." Maya hugged him tightly, her tiny hands clutching his shirt. "I'm okay now, Papa. Midnight saved me. That's all that matters." Her words seemed to drain the last of his fury. Daniel closed his eyes, pulling her close. "You're right," he said softly. "You're here. And that's what matters." Behind them, Maya's mother exhaled shakily, her hands still hovering near Daniel's shoulder as if bracing for the worst. She glanced at the doctor, her expression torn between an unspoken apology and lingering anger. The doctor adjusted his glasses, his voice cautious but steady. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Carter. And again, I am deeply sorry for what you and your family have been through. This was a rare and complex situation." Daniel stood, holding Maya's hand tightly. His voice was calmer now, but still firm. "You need to make sure this doesn't happen again, to anyone, ever." The doctor nodded solemnly. "I'll make sure it doesn't." With that, Daniel turned to his wife, his expression softening as he saw the worry etched into her face. "Let's take Maya home," he said quietly. "She's been through enough." Maya's mother nodded, her hand finding his as the three of them walked out of the hospital together. Midnight was waiting on the car roof, his sharp eyes watching the family intently. As they drove away, Maya glanced out the window and saw him take flight, his wings cutting gracefully through the pale afternoon sky. In the silence of the car, Maya reached for her father's hand. "It's okay, Papa," she said softly. "I think Midnight knew what to do because he loves me." Daniel's grip on her small hand tightened slightly, and he swallowed hard before replying, "I know, sweetheart, and so do I." That evening, the Carter family sat together in the living room, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Maya was curled up on the couch, a blanket draped over her small frame. Midnight perched silently on the windowsill, his sharp eyes fixed on her as though ensuring she was still safe. Her father broke the silence, his voice hesitant but warm. "Maya, sweetheart, can you tell us what happened? Before you—" His voice faltered and he ran a hand over his face, unable to finish the sentence. Maya glanced at him, her blue eyes thoughtful and a little distant. "I was playing under the tree," she began, her voice soft. "I had my candy tin with me and I was throwing the pieces up and catching them in my mouth." She paused, looking down at her hands. "But then I missed, and one went in too fast. It got stuck." Her mother let out a small gasp, covering her mouth. "Oh, Maya," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and lingering fear. "I tried to cough it out," Maya continued, her hands instinctively moving to her throat as she spoke. "But it wouldn't come. I couldn't breathe. Everything started to feel really heavy, like I was sinking. Then it all went dark." Her father leaned forward, his hand resting gently on her knee. "What do you remember after that?" he asked, his tone careful, as though afraid of pressing too hard. Maya's brow furrowed as she tried to recall. "It was strange," she said slowly. "I couldn't see anything, but I could hear Midnight. He was cawing really loud, over and over. It felt like he was calling me back, like he wouldn't stop until I listened." Her mother's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to pull Maya into a tight embrace. "You must have been so scared," she murmured, her voice breaking. Maya nodded against her shoulder. "I was. But I think Midnight wasn't. He knew what to do." Daniel, who had been sitting silently, suddenly stood and walked to the window. He stared out into the dark garden, where the oak tree stood shrouded in shadows. Midnight watched him from the sill, his head tilted slightly as though waiting for something. Turning back to his family, Daniel's expression was a mix of wonder and gratitude. "That bird saved her," he said, his voice low but firm. "Without him, we would have lost her." Maya's mother wiped her tears and glanced at the raven. "He's more than just a pet," she said softly. "He's family." From that day forward, Midnight's role in the Carter household changed. No longer just a companion, he was treated as a true member of the family. Maya would leave small treats for him on the windowsill each morning, and her parents made sure the garden was a safe haven for him to perch and rest. Maya's bond with Midnight only deepened. She spent hours sitting under the oak tree with him, talking softly about her day or simply watching as he soared through the sky. To her, Midnight wasn't just her savior. He was her friend, her protector, and her reminder of the fragile beauty of life. The years drifted by quietly, like the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. Maya grew into a young woman, her once golden curls now falling in longer, more tamed waves. But no matter how much time passed, one constant remained by her side: Midnight. The raven, ever watchful, was more than just a bird. He was a part of her, a living symbol of resilience and love. Maya often sat beneath the old oak tree, now taller and sturdier than when she was a child, flipping through the pages of her journal. It was filled with notes, sketches, and snippets of memories about Midnight. As she looked out at the raven perched on a branch above her, she smiled. Midnight's glossy feathers were streaked with a few silvery strands now, a quiet testament to the passing years. When life became difficult, as it often did, Maya found herself turning back to the memory of that fateful day when Midnight had saved her. It wasn't just an act of survival. It was a lesson in never giving up, in trusting the unexpected. Whether it was facing a challenging exam in school, navigating the heartbreak of losing a friend, or venturing into the uncertainties of adulthood, she drew strength from Midnight's unyielding determination. Eventually, Maya wrote her story. It wasn't just about that day under the oak tree, but about the bond that grew between her and Midnight afterward. The book, A Feathered Guardian, was a heartfelt account of their journey together, a tale of hope, family, and the magic found in everyday life. To Maya's surprise, the book resonated deeply with readers. Letters poured in from across the country, some from children who now looked at their pets with newfound appreciation, others from adults who saw themselves in Maya's struggles and triumphs. The simple story of a girl and her raven found its way into hearts everywhere. One day, Maya received an invitation to speak at a conference about the lessons in her book. Standing on stage before an audience of hundreds, she felt a flicker of nerves, but found her confidence in the familiar weight of Midnight's presence on her shoulder. The raven, though quieter with age, still carried an air of quiet strength that calmed her. She spoke of gratitude, of how the simplest bonds could transform lives, and of the incredible, unseen forces that sometimes intervened when we needed them most. "I owe my life to a raven," Maya said, her voice steady. "But more than that, I owe him for teaching me how to live it fully." Back in her small village, Maya's story became legend. Visitors traveled from far and wide to see the oak tree where the miracle had occurred, and the townsfolk, proud of their local heroine, organized an annual festival to celebrate the tale. Children dressed as ravens and reenacted the moment of Maya's revival, their laughter filling the streets. Vendors sold small carved birds, and storytellers recounted the day Midnight became a hero. Through it all, Midnight remained by Maya's side. His movements grew slower with age, and he often spent his days resting on the windowsill, watching the world pass by. Maya cared for him tenderly, offering his favorite treats and making sure he was comfortable. Though his feathers were no longer as sleek as they once were, his eyes still held that sharp, intelligent glimmer she had known since childhood. The day Midnight passed was one Maya had long feared, yet she faced it with the same love and courage he had always shown her. She found him beneath the oak tree, his wings folded peacefully as if he had chosen that spot to say goodbye. Tears streamed down her face as she knelt beside him, stroking his feathers one last time. "You gave me everything," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you, Midnight, for everything." Maya buried him beneath the oak tree in the very place where he had saved her all those years ago. She placed a small stone marker there, etched with the words, "Guardian and friend, forever in flight." Though her heart ached with loss, Maya felt a deep sense of gratitude. Midnight had lived a full life, one filled with purpose and love. And though he was gone, his presence lingered in the rustle of the oak's leaves, in the laughter of children playing beneath its branches, and in the memory of everyone who heard their story. From that day on, Maya visited the tree often, sitting quietly with a book or sharing her thoughts aloud as though Midnight was still listening. The bond they had shared didn't fade with time. It became part of the village, part of the land, part of Maya herself. And in the quiet moments, when the breeze stirred the leaves just right, Maya could almost hear the faint, familiar call of a raven echoing through the sky. Hey there, friends. Wow, what a journey this story has been. Now, let me start by saying that this tale of Maya and her incredible bond with Midnight the Raven isn't real. It's a work of fiction. But even though it's not a true story, it reflects something very real that we all need to think about. Every year, so many children face tragic accidents, some much worse than what happened to Maya. Sadly, many of these stories don't have a happy ending. The lesson here? Life can change in an instant, and sometimes it's the smallest things, like a candy or a moment of inattention, that can lead to heartbreaking consequences. As parents, caregivers, or even as part of a community, we need to stay vigilant. Whether it's being mindful of the things kids play with, double-checking for safety hazards, or teaching them about dangers in a loving way, every little effort counts. Let Maya's story be a gentle reminder to take that extra second to ensure the safety of the children in our lives. But there's something else this story gives us: hope. Midnight's unwavering loyalty and quick instincts symbolize the unexpected heroes that sometimes step in to save the day. In real life, it might not always be a raven. It could be a neighbor, a stranger, or even just a stroke of luck. But these moments remind us to be grateful for the protectors, big and small, who watch over us. Now, I want to hear from you. What did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of something in your own life? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And hey, maybe take a moment to thank your own Midnight, whoever or whatever that might be. Take care, and I'll see you next time.